Okay, I have made myself a fresh cup of tea, literally still steaming, and I have donned possibly the most appropriate shirt for this ever, because today I'm going to be getting very nerdy into my outlining process for my current project, and I will tell you in just a second a little bit about that. This isn't going to be an advice video, this isn't going to be tips, this isn't going to be saying this is the way I'm going to write all of my future novels. This is just what I'm doing right now, how it's working, if it's working, if I like it, if I don't. I hope this will be interesting for you. I also hope it will be helpful. Let me know in the comments if you're doing similar things with your writing, if you have tried any of these things, if they work, if they don't work, kind of your perspectives on outlining as well. I would love to know. Firstly, it's really important to know that I am a plotter. That is like a huge thing that makes a huge difference. If you're watching this and you're a pantser, you're not gonna have any of this experience. Maybe you're a pantser who's thinking about, trying plotting, or maybe you think that you may actually be a plotter. Basically, I just wanna kind of have a casual chat about my current book and how I'm writing it, how I'm outlining it. My current work in progress, I have talked about a little bit online, so some of you might know this already, but it's a YA fantasy book. Like most of the things that I write, I've written 3 novels before this, all of which are YA fantasy. None of them are published. That is a common question. None of my stuff is published for the time being. My last book, I do think has some potential. I'm still kind of figuring out what I want to do with that one. The first 2 are just no one's ever gonna read those. I'm never gonna do anything with those. They're not salvageable, but they were very important in my writing process, obviously. And then I'm working on what will be my 4th book, and I'm currently in the first draft. I've told you I'm a plotter, but actually the most detailed plotting that I have done has been with these last 2 books. They've turned out far better than my other books, which is of course a mixture of just me getting better, which is pretty normal, me growing up, which is also normal, you kind of change how you write, but also because of the outlines. I mean, let's be real, they turned out better because I had the outline. I am a plotter, and nothing has made it more clear to me than that fact. Because of this, I have come to love the outline, and I am slowly but surely refining how I outline and what works best for me. For my last one, I did a pretty detailed outline that I ended up having to change because I worked on it over the course of several years. So I ended up changing stuff later and kind of not re-outlining, but re-outlining some of it at least. So for this one, I wanted to just kind of take it one more step. I wanted to be even more prepared because I saw the way between books 2 and 3, the way having that detailed outline made such a big difference as opposed to my second book, which just kind of had a vague outline. I mean, it had step-by-steps, but there were quite a lot of gaps between those steps. So then my 3rd book, I was like, I'm gonna be super detailed, but I didn't realize some of the stuff I was leaving out. This book, I wanted to just go all in and just do as much detail as possible. And it has helped me so much in writing the first draft. I feel so much more confident about what I'm doing because I have this outline. So it all started with a brainstorm, of course, well, with an idea, then a brainstorm on the idea. I started taking really detailed notes, and I keep these in Evernote. This is something I have talked about before. I'm not sponsored, nothing in this video is sponsored, but I really do like Evernote, and I've been using it for my past 2 books. Of course, there are other applications you can use, there are other ways that you can do the same thing, basically. I've actually thought about trying Scrivener because I think Scrivener would give me the possibility to do basically the same thing. But for the moment, Evernote is free for 2 devices, so I have it on my phone and on my computer, which is super useful because I can leave notes, on the go, as well as when I'm, on my computer doing my writing. So I made a notebook for my new book, and I made a bunch of folders within that notebook, and I have character profiles, I have place profiles, I have all of that, as well as, of course, an outline profile. And I do keep this in OneNote, which I'm not really sure, maybe in the future I'll try making a notebook and then putting my outline in individual notes for each scene, kind of like Scrivener. But for the moment, I keep it in OneNote, and it works pretty well. So I separate it out by scene, and the scenes are not always that accurate. Sometimes as I'm writing this first draft, actually right now, not just sometimes, right now, I change the scene sometimes. I decide this is actually kind of connected to this other scene. Other times the scene breaks, end up being my chapter breaks. But basically, as I'm outlining, I think of it as if I'm writing the scene. I just don't write the details, if that makes sense. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I actually add dialogue into my description of the scene. Other times it's just like, main character does this, main character goes here, main character meets up with this character and does this, or they discuss this. And then other times, as I'm writing the outline, I get this really good idea and I think, oh, I need to write this little dialogue. So when, main character goes to discuss this with other character, sometimes I actually end up writing some of that dialogue in my outline. This freedom, I think, is really important to give myself. This ability to either pull myself out of the scene if I need to just focus on getting the point by point of the plot into the outline. But then other times, if I'm inspired, if I feel like I need to write a couple lines of dialogue, this would be really fun to start a scene like this, or to start a chapter like this, or to end like this, or if they had this little exchange, and I just write it into the outline, which actually kind of makes my outline a tiny bit messy. I'm not gonna lie, as someone who's very organized, sometimes it can be overwhelming to look at my own outline, because I'll have one line and it'll be like an entire page of writing to get through that line of what I've written should happen. Other times I'll have dialogue written out word by word, and basically I just copy paste as I'm drafting and I've already written it. So the super like organized side of me kind of hates that about my outline, but at the same time I think it's just part of it. I think it's just something I'm gonna have to deal with, because it's the way I outline and it's the way I draft well so far. Let's not forget that I'm not done with the first draft yet. A lot of people have asked me specifically about details, like what kind of detail do you put in the outline? How detailed, how granular do you get when you write an outline? And I mean, I guess you can guess from what I just said, it really does vary. I think it's more about framing your story and getting all the details that have to be there. For example, in my third book, my last book, there were some times when I would write, you know, she learns something about the world or whatever, because it was about, you know, a girl from a normal world discovering that there's another kind of world existing within her reality. So, you know, that kind of concept. And I would have moments when I'd just be like, you know, she reads in this book something, like she learned something about the world. And I realized as I was writing, of course I should have seen that one coming, but I was, you know, less experienced. It's a whole book ago. And I realized that that doesn't work, because it really doesn't give me anything to go on. I need a detail. What does she learn? Because what she learns needs to affect the plot. That's very important. It's not just, let's step up, you know, take it up a notch and that'll be really cool, but it needs to be something that contributes, and then, you know, contributes to the pacing and the flow of the plot and how it unravels. So that, you know, proved some challenges when I was revising, when I was drafting, but also when I was revising, because there were some moments in the plot that didn't quite work. Not saying I won't make that mistake again. I'm sure as I'm revising this draft, once I have it written, I will find stuff that I'm like, why didn't you do this right the first time? That's just bound to happen, but I'm not gonna be making that specific mistake when I had moments as I was outlining where I wanted something interesting to happen, or when I wanted to kind of step it up, and this needs to be a moment when, you know, the tension gets higher. I specifically planned that out, the details of that, what exactly is going to happen. I don't have to, you know, figure out exactly how it's going to happen, but I need to figure out what in the general scheme of things, so that when I'm writing, everything makes sense and I don't have, you know, moments in the plot that get too lulling or that feel like they don't belong or that they're not necessary. That being said, there are certain things that I don't necessarily get super granular about. I know, I mean, I've been watching a lot of videos about world building recently, because my world building in this book is so much more complex than anything I've written before. I'm not writing epic high fantasy, so I mean, there's still room to grow. There's still more adventures to be had in the future if I decide to write something even more complex. But the world that I'm building does have a lot more facets than anything I've ever written before. And I think that's great. And I think it's gonna turn out to be a much more interesting world than anything I've written before. But it's also posed a lot of challenges. And a lot of the advice that I've read is talking about, you know, how it's important to have the world developed, but that there's a lot of research and things like that that you actually can do in revisions and afterward. So there are certain things that I'm not necessarily getting down to granular detail about, I don't know, what they're eating and things like that. These things I'm kind of figuring out as I'm drafting. Sometimes I'm, you know, first drafting and something will be interesting and I'll be like, oh, this would be cool if they ate this for lunch, or if, you know, it was a certain way. But those kinds of things could change in revisions, and it's not something I necessarily cared about in my outline unless I had a really cool idea that I decided to write in there. Characterization is something that I'm really trying to put a lot more of in my outline. Definitely my last outline for my last book, one of the things that suffered with also my drafting, so that I had to kind of work on that in revisions as well, was that I didn't have a lot of characterization in the outline. I think when I got myself in my outline brain, I was really thinking plot and plot points, which obviously relate to character, and, you know, because I don't have passive characters, the characters actively take a part in the plot, there was obviously characterization mixed in, but there were little things like conversations between characters and moments that needed to happen, and just kind of character growth that wasn't directly related to a plot point, but that was super important, that I left out. Okay, my camera decided to run out of battery. So where was I exactly? So yeah, so in this one, I really tried to get a lot more characterization worked into my outline, a lot more details about how my characters are growing, and not just kind of winging it in the draft when it comes to characterization. A huge part of this has been my brainstorming as well. So not just the outline itself, but the brainstorming that has gone to the side of this. So I have showed you my Evernote where you can see all the different character profiles I have. I don't have character profiles for everybody. That would be just a little bit overkill, I think. But I have character profiles for anyone who is vaguely important, definitely for my main characters, but also for anyone who has maybe a bit more of an interesting backstory or who plays a role in the plot that's a little bit more important or vital. I think I have in a video somewhere gone over the different things that I write down within each character profile. I have like these categories, these different topics like hair, eyes, body, name, family, siblings, parents, like anything that might be important. And of course, for every character, I don't necessarily fill out every single one. For example, sometimes it's not interesting to know the family of, a character that maybe is in there enough to be important to the plot, but isn't in there enough to where we need to know their family history. But for your main character, for your other, kind of side characters, side main characters, that's really important to know where they come from, who their family is. But not every character needs all of these things. I still do keep it in the file though, in case at a future stage I want to fill that out. And it's kind of just the basics about the character. Even just kind of brainstorming all of these things to those details, and even for the characters I don't have those details, thinking about do I need those details because it's in the file already, has helped my characterization feel so much more rooted, even from the start. And then of course I was writing these character profiles as I was writing the outline. And that factored into my outline as well. And I think it really, really did help. There is still some stuff I think missing, and that's kind of something I'm working on as I'm drafting, both like writing it into my draft and also going back and editing my outline and adding stuff to my outline, because I feel like it's important to have in that document too. That's kind of just a preference thing. I don't actually know if it'll be worth it in the end, but I think it will, because the outline I'm more likely to consult when I'm revising if I want to just quickly know like when does this happen, or what is like the order of events with this. I'm going to go back and consult that outline. So if there's something that I'm adding into the draft, I need to add it into my outline as well. But more often than not, if I have an idea as I'm drafting that I want to add in, I will add it to the outline before I even write it into the draft. So that's not really an issue for me. This also kind of brings up another important aspect of outlining, and one that I'm still kind of figuring out, but that is how much can your outline change as you're drafting? And this is definitely something that I am figuring out as I go still. It's something that I've done a little bit differently with every book, obviously, because as I've just told you, I've only really been detailed outlining 2 books, and my last one missed some details that I should have had. With this one, I do think I'm probably going to change less in the outline than I changed for my last book. Gosh, I hope so. I hope I don't have as many changes to make in revisions as I had to make with my last book. Revisions are always difficult, but you try to minimize the complications that you're causing yourself. Your future self will thank you. That being said, as I am writing this first draft, little things are changing and really just details are being added. I think that's the big thing, because there were a few gaps as I was outlining, especially towards the end of the book. There's kind of an element of pantsing that I think a lot of plotters do, whether they admit it or not. But there's certain things you kind of have to let the book tell you, and sometimes even if you plan them out, the book will tell you otherwise. That sounds really like vague and strange. The book tells you. I mean, it can't actually tell you, but writers will know what I mean. It kind of sometimes does feel like the book is guiding you in the way that it needs to go. So there is an element of that. There is an element of just kind of figuring it out. So even though I had the details of my end planned, there were still a couple little gaps that I kind of just left over in my outline, and I just thought like, I'll figure it out when I get there. I'll detail that a bit more. In fact, I think I have mentioned it before, but I had super detailed scene outlines for the first 2/3 of the book, and in the last third, I actually even just wrote beats. I didn't write scene, I wrote beat, like beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, because they're beats in the story. And they're not actually scenes. I don't know if that distinction is very clear except in my own head, but a scene would be very much like this is how it's going to unfold. Even if there's little gaps in between it, I have it kind of like the transitions and stuff figured out. But beats are very much like there could be a couple scenes in between these 2 beats, but this is kind of the important thing that needs to happen. So that's how I mapped out kind of the last third. So it was mapped out, it was figured out in terms of plot, but there's a lot of gaps that I'm kind of figuring out. That being said, I'm not figuring them out as I'm drafting in the way that you might think, that is not clear. Let me explain that one. What I mean is that I'm not actually first drafting a beat, if that makes sense. So for example, if I'm writing chapter 20, random number, I'm writing chapter 20, it already has an outline, but let's say at chapter 25 is when it transitions into beats. As I'm writing chapter 20, see this scene kind of unfolding, and I see how the plot needs to unfold as I'm writing chapter 20. So then I take a break from chapter 20, I go in my outline down to chapter 25, and then I develop those beats into outlines. And so far, I have done this a few times with great success, I think, so far in my first draft. Again, I probably should be like knocking on wood or something. But I've done this at a few different moments as I'm writing, and something in the plot just kind of unlocks for me. And so then I go and fill out the beats into scenes, and so maybe, you know, a couple of beats I'll develop into a few different scenes. Then I'll go back to writing, and then as more of the plot kind of comes together in the draft, then I can develop further beats. So that's really what I've been doing. It's kind of a mix now. I mean, once I have really a structured outline, a very detailed outline, I'm not gonna lie, the thing is super detailed. I would show you, but spoilers. But then balancing that with drafting as well and letting the story kind of come together. So it's kind of like the big detailed outline at the beginning, then drafting a little more outline, drafting a lot more, a little more outline, drafting a little bit more. It's kind of coming together that way, and that's how I'm finding it's working. Depending on the story, I would like to be able to get all these details done before I draft. Maybe it was like impatience that made me want to start drafting before I had these details outlined, but I honestly think that there's, like I said, there's this element of, it's not really pantsing. I mean, it's not pantsing, but there's an element of discovering the story. And so once you have the outline in beats, for example, the scenes sometimes don't always unfold so naturally later in the story because you haven't quite discovered your story yet. There's a lot about the characters you learn as well. I've learned so much about my characters. Despite the fact that, like I said, I have detailed character profiles that I have been also developing and updating as I write the story, but a lot of that stuff was written before, especially about my main characters. And even so, I'm discovering them as I'm writing, and sometimes I'm discovering things that I need to change about my character profile, about preferences they have or certain stylistic ways they speak, or kind of just their attitudes, like the characterization sometimes has to shift a little bit as I'm writing. And I realize that only as I'm writing. So basically it's complicated. I'm gonna stop there for today, but I definitely could keep rambling about this for a lot longer if I wanted to. So let me know in the comments if you want to hear more rambles about plot, outlining, characterization, any other aspect of the writing process. Of course, if you're interested in this kind of video content, be sure to subscribe below, turn on notifications so you can see when I post new videos. You can also follow me on Instagram. I update my Instagram stories almost every day, and that's also where I post kind of the most timely information about what I'm writing, when I'm writing. You can also follow me on Twitter, of course, The Writing Haven. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon in another video.